First question goes to Mercedes Stephenson, Global News.
Hi, Prime Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. You've announced that you're going to get to 2%, which has been a long anticipated thing that your allies have been looking for, and you say it's by 2032. But your government hasn't attached money in terms of commitments, weapon systems, explaining how we're going to get there. So I'm wondering how credible you think allies or Canadians will find this plan when you're releasing something so major as sort of a sub-point in a press conference.
On the contrary, we have steadily increased over the past years our investments in defence. $175 billion in new defence spending announced over the past 8 years, with significant material and equipment purchases. We have demonstrated, including most recently with our North Strong and Free Defence Policy Update, a credible, concrete plan that gets us to 1.74% by 2030. Now, that's starting from a place where the previous government had us below 1% of GDP on defense spending. So we have had to steadily and massively invest in increasing our capabilities in Canada over the past number of years, because it's not just something the Canadians expect or our allies expect. It's something that the world requires. The world is a more dangerous, unstable place with shifting geopolitical realities, more conflicts and wars springing up in places we wouldn't expect. There is a need, particularly with our responsibility over the Arctic, to be stepping up, and that's what we have done. And because we have a concrete plan that gets us to 174, with included in it plans on submarines that we hadn't yet officialized, with plans on other capabilities that we're developing, plans to increase enrollment and enlistment as well. These are things that means we can say with confidence and assurance that we will hit the 2% spending mark by 2032.
Next question.
Murray Brewster with CBC News. Prime Minister, thank you for taking the question. The timeline could have very well have been just a line in your defense policy last spring. Why wasn't it announced until this point? And you could have saved yourself a whole world of grief by doing so. So why wasn't it announced? But also at the same time, how much confidence can we place in this timeline when you see the economic indicators that underpin this calculation showing Canada actually moving backward away from the target you set in the defense policy? So how much can we actually place stock in what we see here today?
I think one of the things that we have demonstrated is consistent investments in defense, in understanding that the world has changed, and where the previous government had defense spending hit record lows, below 1%, despite a commitment to move towards 2%. We had a lot of catching up to do, and that had big purchases involved. When Canada talks about reaching 10%, that's as one of the largest defense budgets in NATO. We are buying big things, we are building big things, and we are protecting the longest coastline in the world, including with increased responsibilities for the Arctic. We laid out a defense policy update that wasn't focused on answering media questions or focused on political advantage. It was about doing what is right and what is needed in a responsible way. And so I'm happy to turn to Bill Blair to further talk about the DPU and the 2% pledge. Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The defense policy that we released in April, I think, provided Canadians and our allies with a very clear roadmap and a path forward for Canadian investments in defense. But we also were very clear that in that document, and the budget that was then subsequently released a few weeks later, we fully costed certain initiatives within that budget. But we acknowledged in our policy document that we needed to do many other things, and they are big things. And just for example, spending Canadian tax dollars well requires long-term planning and investment in capability in Canada. Our shipbuilding strategy, for example, to replace our Halifax fleet, is going to eventually deliver for the Royal Canadian Navy 15 new surface combatant ships, but the first one will not be delivered and available to them for deployment until 2032. It's a very, very significant investment in shipbuilding in Canada. It's going to create 10,800 sustainable jobs over 25 years. It's going to add $40 billion to our GDP, and it's going to deliver for the Royal Canadian Navy an extraordinary capability. We were able this week, and over the past several weeks, to assure our allies of the path forward for Canada and to show them that we had a credible, verifiable path to 2%, that we were making significant new investments in defense policy, and it's also enabled us to enter into, I think, an important and growing relationship with our NATO allies. I have signed an agreement earlier this week with Germany and with Norway in order to be more collaborative together in military national industrial policy and working together. There are a number of important conversations that our recent announcement with respect to the procurement of submarines have initiated among our allies. We think that there are real opportunities, and I am able to assure our allies we're serious about investing in Canada's national defense. We're doing it the right way so that there is a benefit not only to our military capability and our NATO allies, but also to the Canadian economy, Canadian workers, and Canadian industry. And that work has been moving forward with the introduction of our new defense policy. I think it gives us an opportunity to be able to demonstrate to our own country and hopefully to all of you that we are serious about investing in defense and we are doing the work that is necessary to do it right.
Next question.
Glenn McGregor, City News. Prime Minister, you say you have a plan to spend this money, but do you also have a plan to pay for it? Because the estimates are this is going to cost $15, $20 billion annually in perpetuity. How do you do that in the fiscal framework? Do you cut other programs? Do you go deeper into deficit?
We have demonstrated over the past number of years that we can and have been investing in our national defense. $175 billion of projected new investments in national defense and now and into the future in a responsible way, and at a time where we're also stepping up with the most ambitious housing plan Canada has ever seen. Investing in childcare, because we know that's not just a social program, that's also an economic program. Creating economic growth, creating record high employment. Investing in the green jobs of the future. These are things we're doing even as we invest record levels in our military and continue to. The situation, the global context requires us to be stepping up on defense. But I will remind people that stepping up on defense investments doesn't just involve spending money outside of this country. It means investing in capacity building, in good jobs, in innovation, in factories and development of economic growth in Canada while we invest in ourselves and our ability not just to defend ourselves and our north, but our allies at a time where everyone is interconnected.
Next question.
Laura Dillon, Kane, Bloomberg News. Thank you for taking our questions. You've been asked about 2% many times already, but I want to ask very frankly, how can Canadians be sure that you're serious about defense? Your government's been in power for nearly 9 years. Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago. We are neighbors with Russia in the Arctic. Your own defense minister wants a credible, verifiable plan. And yet this week, as of yesterday, your government was still discussing how to reach that goal. And today you come out with a timeline with no details of how to get there. So why should we believe you are serious and this is a priority for your government?
Canada is in the top 5 countries of NATO in terms of absolute increases in spending of NATO on military expenditures over the past 8 years. We have stepped up massively. After years of underinvestment by the previous Conservative government, we have stepped up in investing and in planning for the future in a deeply changing world. We went from below 1% of GDP on defense spending under the Conservatives to now projecting 1.76% of GDP just in the coming years. And that extends clearly and naturally to 2% with the investments that we're announcing that are coming up, whether it's on 12 new submarines, up to 12 new submarines, whether it's on helicopters, whether it's on increased enrollment, whether it's on long-range missile, whether it's on any of the other things that we know Canada is going to need to continue to step up in. Canada is the 7th largest defense expenditures in NATO. We are a big country. with big responsibilities and big needs. That's why, whether we're talking about 15 new surface combatant frigates, whether we're talking about 88 fighter jets, whether we're talking about $38 billion for upgrading NORAD, whether we're talking about a total of $175 billion that we've announced over the past years for the coming years in defense spending, we have shown that a responsible government steps up in a changing world and does the necessary work, not just to increase defense spending, but to do it in the right way that gives both benefits and jobs to Canadians, but mostly that develops the capabilities that we, and quite frankly our allies, are going to be relying on in an increasingly dangerous and uncertain world.
Next question.
This is for either the Prime Minister or Minister Blair. And correct me if my understanding is wrong here, but are there not some low-hanging fruit still that could be picked to reach that 2%? I mean, my understanding is that the U.S. Coast Guard is under the Defense Department. Its ships are armed. It's able to book all of those expenses with NATO. Canada's Coast Guard is under Fisheries and Oceans. The ships aren't armed, and it's only able to book some of its Coast Guard expenditures. Wouldn't it be simple just to put a $50,000 gun turret on a $20 million ship and book it? And why has that not been done? And as a corollary to that, also with these icebreakers, will we be able to claim the money that we spend on those as part of our 2%? And if it requires arming those ships to get that, would you be willing to commit to do that?
Thanks for the question, Evan, because you actually sort of underline one of the challenges that Canada has always had with the idea of 2% as the metric by which we judge whether or not a country is living up and contributing to NATO. Canada, over the past decades, has been there to lead in NATO on all of the various initiatives that have put forward. We continually step up and punch above our weight, something that isn't always reflected in the crass mathematical calculation that certain people turn to very quickly, which is why we've always questioned the 2% as the be-all and end-all of evaluating contributions to NATO. So yes, there may be ways where we could shift some accounting or make a little tweak here, or give every Coast Guard member a handgun and say, okay, we've done our job. Would that make Canada safer? Would that make Canadians better off? Would that make us better able to counter the malign influence of Russia in democracies around the world, the partnerships with China, the activities of the DPRK in Iran? Our approach on defense is a profoundly serious one that looks at what capabilities we need, what is needed and what is good for Canadians, where we can best contribute to the world, and how to get there in a responsible way as a government. That has guided us, not some nominal targets that make for easy headlines and accounting practices, but don't actually make us automatically safer. That's the work we've done. That's the work I've asked Bill to do, and that's exactly what he's done. Bill.
Yeah, if I may, Canada's made the greatest investment in the Royal Canadian Air Force since the Second World War. In the last 2 years, we've signed contracts for over 200 aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force and made a historic investment in the training of new pilots and maintenance crews. We're also making the most significant investment in the renewal of the Royal Canadian Navy in its history. 15 new surface combatant ships, 6 new Arctic offshore patrol vessels, new supply vessels, and as we announced just earlier this week, we're doing the work now necessary to identify exactly what our Royal Canadian Navy is going to need for underwater surveillance in a submarine fleet. We know that there's a great deal of work to do, but respectfully, I think Canada's obligations to our NATO partners and to our own citizens in the defense of our country requires more than a little bit of accounting variation. It really requires investment, real investment in capability for our Canadian Armed Forces. We have asked them to do an extraordinary job, and for over 150 years, they have been there for Canadians, but also for all of our allies around the world. We're going to make sure that they have that capability, and they also have the people that they're going to require to live up to our obligations and to defend our country and our continent. That requires investment. But we want to also reassure Canadians, we're not just spending money, we're investing money. And that's investing in capability for the Canadian Armed Forces, but it's also investing in Canada. It's investing in Canadian workers, Canadian industry, and the Canadian economy. And I think that work, if we show our work to Canadians and to our allies, I can tell you that in all my conversations with our allies over the course of this week, I think they have come to a very good understanding and a real appreciation for the hard work that Canada is doing to live up to our obligations. And as well, I think we've got more work to do to explain to Canadians why these investments remain a priority for our government and why there's real benefits to Canadians by making these investments and delivering not only on our commitment to our allies, but on our commitment to defend our country.
Last question.
Alex Ballingal, the Toronto Star. You say that the 2% is a crass calculation, but we've heard your allies over and over again all week talk about how important it is for all members to hit 2% as a reflection of a fair burden share within the alliance. It's obviously been a political problem for you guys this week. Are you comfortable having that problem remain hanging over Canada for another 8 years when we have some of the allies saying this floor should be raised to 2.5%, 3%? Can we remain below the 2% for another 8 years?
It actually hasn't been a political problem this year, this week. It has been a conversation that allies have been pleased to hear that we have a plan and a timeline to get to the 2%, but mostly they are interested and excited about the kinds of investments we're making, from 88 new fighter jets to up to 12 new submarines, to moving forward on NORAD modernization, to continuing to step up in support of Ukraine. Canada is here. We have the seventh or eighth largest defense budget in NATO. We're one of the big countries in NATO that contributes significantly to everything people are doing. And when they hear us say, yes, we're going to be doing even more, we're going to be stepping up, we're getting the equipment that people are going to be relying on, we're getting the strength in our military that the world can count on, that is good news. It has been good news this week, and will continue to be good news as we make sure that Canada continues to step up in the world and punch way above its weight.
Thank you. This concludes today's press conference.
Sure.
Can I just add something? I think that for a long time, Canada has been blessed by our geography, which is a difference with many other NATO countries. What is different now is that we can not only rely on that geography anymore, particularly in the Arctic. And what our allies are seeing now is that we are investing also in ourselves, in our defense, in our Arctic, because at the end of the day, Canada is in charge with Arctic countries, the defense of the northern frontier of NATO. And that's what our allies have seen this week as well.
Thank you.